For joining us. So just talking about the month, what does this month seek to achieve?
Well, we dedicated the month as the South African government for all of us as South Africans to take a moment and actually say what have we contributed to the development of people with disabilities. It's aligned to the UN International Day of Persons with Disabilities, which celebrated on the 3rd of December, and we made it the National Day of Persons with Disabilities as South Africa. So it's all about, let's take a step back and let's say for the past 12 months, what have we done to actually make the lives of disabled South Africans better?
Now, there's a white paper that's been adopted, Transformation of the Public Service, reiterating a commitment to achieving a minimum of 2% representation of persons with disabilities in public service. This was in 2005. It's 2012 now. How are we doing?
Well, we are not very well. I think we at national government, we at 0.96%. So it's really, actually, the targets were set in 1996. So it's really not a very good excuse. The transformation document was just extending. But what's good is that government is really pushing, because when we started this year, we have managed to push, because we're at 0.21. So we're now at 0.96, but we're looking forward to making sure that come March, as the President said, no more extensions. March 2013, that's it. Everybody must be 2%, and that's what we are working on.
Why have we struggled up to now?
We had a lot of excuses. That's the first thing that we need to expect as South Africans, because the targets are not only set for the public service, they are set for the private sector as well. And I also need to say that there are government departments that have met and surpassed the 2%.
Such as which ones?
Our one. Trade and industry, amongst others.
And 2% is low, though. Eh?
Yes, it is low. We were supposed to be at 5% in 2005, and we were supposed to be at an equivalent of the nation, which is 10% at the moment.
Is that the national representation of people with disabilities?
Yeah.
Or 10% of the population?
Definitely. We're at between 10 and 15%. We're waiting for the census to tell us. But, you know, with all the reckless drivers, the numbers are not static, so it's very difficult to pin it down. With all our accidents, with all our different diseases and all of that, we really do have quite a chunkable size of people with disabilities in South Africa. Now,
the department hosted the National Disability in March this year. What were the major points that came out that have managed to address, that have not been addressed adequately?
Well, firstly, it was my transition from public works to women, and being given the responsibility to provide leadership by government on the disability agenda. The summit was intended to consult South Africans with disabilities to say, let's together set the priorities, because disability is a very broad agenda. We can't do everything at the same time. So the summit was intended to say, let's agree on the priorities for the next 3 years, so that we are able to measure each other and be able to say, this is where we are now and this is where we want to be in 3 years' time. And that's what the summit was about.
So what are the priorities then for the next 3 years?
Well, the priorities are aligned to the 5 priorities of government. The first one is education, Vuyo. We need to make sure that children with disabilities are in school, on-time learning. We need to make sure they access early childhood development. We need to make sure that there's issues of accessible healthcare services in terms of the professionals that are working with children and people with disabilities, so that there is appropriate assessment. The 2%, as well as access of resources by entrepreneurs with disabilities. We need to make sure that there is support services, especially community-based rehabilitation in rural areas, so that people in rural areas with disabilities are able to begin to get out of the dark rooms, and parents are beginning to appreciate the disabled children.
Yeah. Is that what is still the case in rural areas? People with disabilities in dark rooms, they don't come out?
Yes. It's still real. It's not only a rural area, not far, just here around the corner in Soweto, we're still dealing with that, where because of the way communities deal with parents of disabled children, because of what society still deals with disabilities. That's why this year the theme for the Disability Month is breaking barriers towards an inclusive, accessible society for all. And as a department, we're saying the biggest barrier is people's attitudes. And
people still are ashamed of
yes.
their family,
yes.
siblings or children that
yes.
are disabled.
Yes, and that leads to a lot of abuse, Voyo, in the families. So we say in this month, above all, we're saying, is your attitude a barrier or a blessing to disability development? And that's the question you must ask all the viewers of Morning Life this morning, to say, you know, they need to take a step back as South Africans and say, is my attitude a blessing or a barrier
yes.
to people with disabilities? Because if we could change the attitudes, we can remove the steps tomorrow, or we can have all of the infrastructure that the Americans have. But if the attitudes of the people continue to make you feel unwelcomed, disabled people will never use. But if you are in an environment that is welcoming, even if there's stairs, I'll be happy if I'm on a wheelchair to be carried with dignity and respect by people who want me in that space, than be in a flat area where I can walk in myself, but I am not welcomed. So the biggest barrier is the attitudes. Once we can deal with our own attitudes, we can deal with understanding that people with disabilities are human beings. They, you know, they've got rights. They need to be respected. Their special needs to be understood and supported. And then, I mean, I can function and compete with my colleagues as well, despite my visual impairment. So
during this month, what are you doing in communities? How are you reaching out to communities?
Well, there's a lot of, firstly, we made sure that majority of municipalities have disability dialogues at a local level to be able to facilitate the participation of disabled people in ward committees, because that's where the issues are.
Okay.
Amongst the many other activities. But to also say, the month, for the first time in 3 years, will be closed by the President himself. Because we said it's time that disabled people say, Mr. President, what have your administration delivered to us? Okay. So he will do that on the 4th of December in Mpumalanga through a Siyahlola campaign.
Thank you very much. Henrietta Bogopane-Zulu is Deputy Minister in the Department, Women, Children and People with Disabilities.